Britain and the Blitz on London, and the war was still going on when I left school. And just before that, an officer, a retired officer from the Indian Army, had come to the school to lecture to us. And he said that the war in Europe was nearly over, and any of us with a bit of adventurous spirit should go east and join the Indian Army.
What age you were at that time?
I was then 17. And so I onto a troop ship, off to make my first arrival in Bombay.
No, but how are you commissioned? Were you trained?
I'm not commissioned yet.
Not commissioned then?
Not yet commissioned. I'm still a cadet.
Oh.
And I arrived in Bombay as a cadet.
But they were sending cadets to India?
Yes, I was heading for the Indian Army. I got my commission. I was commissioned in Mao. I did my officer training in Mao. And having completed the officer training in Mao, I was sent down to Chhindwara to the Jungle Warfare School, because as soon as we were commissioned, we went straight to Burma, because the war was going on then.
Where did you go in Burma?
I didn't go to Burma. I went to, after Mao, to Chhindwara to do the jungle training, and just as we finished our jungle training, the atom bombs were dropped on Japan, and the war came to a sudden end.
Now, what was the training like in Chhindwara? Was it run by British officers?
It was run by British officers and some Indian officers, because by then quite a few Indian officers, of course, as you know, were being commissioned into the Indian Army. And it was, a lot of them were very experienced people who had already had experience in Burma. And then having completed the jungle training and expecting to join the battalion of the Rajputana Rifles, which was in Burma, as I said, the war came to a sudden end. So instead of going to Burma, I went to join the battalion in Fort Sandaman in North Baluchistan, now Pakistan, of course, north of Quetta, some 200 miles north of Quetta. And I joined the 1st Battalion of the Rajputana Rifles in Fort Sandaman in 1945. When I arrived there, I spent a time with the battalion, but then came across what looked to me to be a far more interesting and adventurous organisation, which was part of the Frontier Irregular Corps of Scouts and Militias. And so I seconded to the Zob militia.
Which militia?
Zob.
Zob,
Z-H-O-B, which was the northern part of Baluchistan.
Mm-hmm.
And they were civil armed forces working under the civil government as a sort of police force, patrolling and guarding the border with Afghanistan. And I continued with the Zob militia for some time. And it was there that I was able to enjoy my love and interest in horses, because we still had mounted infantry. In fact, I was in charge of 183 horses. And with these, the troops of 60, we would patrol the Afghan border, taking our saman and food for the horses on camels.
Was it, that time you saw any action? Was any war going on?
There was always a tribal war, because there was smuggling, and the raiders from Afghanistan used to come over into India, as it was, then into Pakistan, raiding and looting and stealing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the war. While I was there, I met the governor. It was called the agent of the Governor General in Baluchistan, who came to visit us in Fort Sandaman. And later he asked me to become his ADC, aide-de-camp.
Mm-hmm. And
so I moved up to Peshawar, where I spent some happy years working as ADC to...
How many years you were in Peshawar?
I was in Peshawar for 2 years, and during that time with the governor, I met some very interesting people, including Mr. Jenner, Fatima, his sister, Anthony Eden, who was then the Foreign Secretary and who came out to visit India, as it was then. And so after a while there, the governor left, and I then remained with the Scouts and went to Chitral, where I joined the Chitral Scouts, and spent some very, very happy time again on the Afghan border, but particularly it's a very mountainous country, and it was there that I became involved in serious mountaineering, a Norwegian expedition.
No, but first, if you continue with your army life.
It is still army life.
Oh, okay.
It is still army life because, army, civil armed forces. I'm still in the Scouts. And a Norwegian expedition came to climb Tirich Mir, and I was asked if I would go with them to act as look after their bundibus and their porters.
There's a liaison officer, as we call now. We call it liaison officer. Were you that officially?
Officer, yes. And there was also a Pakistani liaison officer, but he didn't know the local area, so there were two of us. Anyway, sort of went on. And to talk further, there was when I was getting ready to go to Tirich Mir, I laid out some clothes on a charpoy in my room, and this included a very nice bright red jersey. And then when I went to pack, I found the jersey had been put away again. And I said to my orderly, "Where's that red jersey?" And he said, "Oh, you can't wear red on Tirich Mir because the fairies don't like red." And the local people believed that fairies lived on the summit of Tirich Mir, and they were guarded by what they call Borgazu. Borgazu were giant frogs who lived in the glaciers at the foot of the mountain. And as you know, glaciers make a lot of noise, they creak and groan. And this is how the local superstition had arisen, that the Borgazu were guarding the mountain. Anyway, we eventually...
But then, I mean, could you find out what it had to do with red color? Why the fairies don't like red?
That I didn't find out. Yeah, I didn't find out. But we got to a high camp, and my Chitrali orderly came with me. And suddenly, in the middle of the night, there was a lot of screaming and shouting. And one of the other porters came and said, "Quickly, come, Mutai," that was his name, has puggled, he's gone mad. And I went out to see what happened. And there was Mutai, my orderly, saying, look, sitting on the tent, on top of your tent, there are 3 fairies, and they're wearing red." And anyway, the doctors gave him morphine, and we took him down the mountain, and he recovered. But the superstition was so strong that it caused him to have a fit. Anyway, we eventually climbed the mountain, Tirich Mir, and that was one of the first high mountains to be climbed, as you remember. It was the same year that the French climbed Annapurna. So that, those were the 2 high peaks.
Did you go up on Tirich Mir?
Yes, I went to the top with Norwegians, yeah.
And how was that climb? Can you describe it?
Well, it was the first time I climbed as high as that. It was the first time I had the experience of lack of oxygen.
But were you trained to do this?
No. No, I wasn't trained, and I wasn't equipped. I had, for clothes, I wore 2 pairs of pajamas, trousers under my cotton trousers, and on my top I had several woolly jerseys and a golfing jacket, and a woolly hat, and that was it. I didn't have any proper
but what about snowshoes, gloves?
Snowshoes. The shoes we used to wear then in the old days, crossing the passes, was we had skins which we put round our feet, and then we put thongs of leather to give a grip. And I set off with these up the mountain, and the Norwegians were horrified. They said, "You can't possibly climb in those." And they had a spare pair of boots, so they lent me a pair of climbing boots. Anyway. And
other equipment, I mean, ice axe and all other things like, hand gloves, goggles, that all you had?
No, they lent me goggles and they lent me an ice axe. Otherwise, I didn't. And so that was a Tirich Mir. And when I got, then my time in India, Pakistan came to an end, and I went back to England to find that in the climbing world I was a bit of a hero, because I was the first person to climb a high peak since before the war when Shipton and Tillman climbed Mount David.
Yes. So that must have been quite a novelty.
So it was quite a thing.
Were you by this time member of the Alpine Club?
No, I was then invited to join the Alpine Club, and I hadn't heard about the Alpine Club, and I said, well, what are their facilities? Can you stay there? Have they got a dining room or a bar? And this, that, and the other. I thought it was like a London social club.
Oh.
But anyway, I was then did join the Alpine Club, and met a lot of climbing friends through that.
So who were your early climbing friends?
Well, I met Shipton and all these people.
Mm-hmm. How was Shipton that time, if you can recall some memories?
Yes, well, I don't know particular memories. He was a very shy person, he didn't talk very much.
Mm-hmm.
And Tillman I met too, and Tillman was a bit eccentric, to say the least.
Any incidences that you found of his eccentricity?
Any what?
I mean, how he was eccentric. Do you have any incidents to narrate?
Not, well, Alpine Club wise, we went, when I was with the Alpine Club, Everest was in the offing, and I was a potential possible member for the Everest expedition because of my experience on Tirich Mir. And so I was invited through a joint committee of the Alpine Club and the Royal Geographical Society to join an expedition to Switzerland, to the Weisshorn, with other potential members of the Everest expedition, two of whom were already well known and who were going. One was Mike Ward, and the other was Jack Tucker and John Jackson. And so we set off to the Alps and had an interesting time climbing in the Alps. They slightly resented me because I was well acclimatized, and going up to the Weisshorn, just 15,000 feet, I wasn't even puffing.
Just 15,000 feet.
That's 15,000
because of
feet.
your Tirich Mir experience.
And I'd lived in Chitral 9,000 feet. We'd gone over passes all the time of 10,000 and so on. And so I was very well acclimatized. And the mountains in the Alps, I was hardly even puffing. And this tended to upset some of those who were with me. Anyway, I was rejected for the Everest expedition.
Now, that's surprising, don't you think so?
Well, it was, I think, a bit of jealousy. They were rejected because of lack of technical knowledge. But at the same time, I think a lot of it was resentment by the people who were with me because of this business of being so well acclimatized. Anyway.
No, but I mean, didn't Royal Geographical Society Committee or John Hunt took any interest in selecting you?
It didn't get to that stage then. But the same year that I hadn't met these people then. This was quite a low junior business.
Yeah, but did you resent this yourself, that you were not selected?
Well,
you felt it was unfair?
I did, but only for a very short time, because at the same time that I was rejected by Everest, I heard from Charlie Houston from America saying, would I join his K2 expedition?
Oh, so when they, I mean, you know, door is closed, window is always open.
K2.
But how did he know Houston?
I didn't.
Then how did he hear of you?
Through the Norwegians.
Oh.
Through Tirich Mir. He'd heard that I climbed Tirich Mir, and he got in touch with the Norwegians, who said, yes, Streather's all right.
All right. Just all right, or he gave some sort of a...
Well, he said I'd done well on Tirich Mir. And so he invited me to go to the K2 expedition, but mainly as transport officer, to arrange the blunderbuss for coolies, porters getting to the mountain, and arrange the porters on the mountain. Well, in the event, we got to K2 and went higher and higher, and I just went along with them, and higher as we went, and was involved, of course, in the accident, the tragic accident that we had.
So how did you find your relations with Americans?
Oh, I got on very well with them.
Why? What was the reason?
Well, they were very much like us. They're a bit surprised at the facade. And I think they...
I mean, what was the difference between the British and Americans climbing on those days?
Well, about the climbing, it was the behavior to the local people. The Americans seemed to have under the impression that the British had spent their time beating the natives and generally bullying them and so on, and that our empire had been a disgraceful.
Okay, I mean they were a little against the empire.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And the colonies and so on. Mind you, they've got their problems now because they've inherited virtually an empire with Baghdad and all that lot.
Yes.
And they don't know how to cope with it. Anyway, where were we? So, eventually, we reached the summit, and I was lucky to be one of those who got there.
Okay, and who others were with you in the summit?
There was Dirk van Berg, Henry Berg, and Arne Ness. The four of us that went to the summit. And as I say, then from Tirich Mir, because I spoke on Tirich Mir, I was invited eventually to join the Kangchenjunga.
No, I mean, sir, we have to talk more about K2.
Oh, K2, we haven't been to K2 yet, have we? We then went, because of that, I was invited to go to K2. And K2 was an extremely difficult mountain. You climb all the way up, and you have to climb down. You can't just walk down like walking down the ice wall of Everest.
It's a very serious mountain.
It's a very serious mountain. It's serious all the way. It's serious going up, serious coming down. And we done extremely well. We got to the high camp just on the shoulder at about 25,000 feet. And just as we arrived there, the weather was always unpredictable in that area. And as we arrived at the high camp, the weather clamped in and there was a very bad storm. And we were trapped in our tents for 10 days. We were very tired with the wind flapping and the noise and so on. And it was difficult to melt water with our primus stoves because they kept blowing out. So we were becoming very dehydrated. And partially a result of the dehydration, Arthur Gilkey, one of the he developed blood clots in his leg.
I mean, that was because of dehydration.
Partially because of dehydration, yes. And he obviously couldn't walk. So we attempted to get him. We rowed him up in a sleeping bag, rowed him up in a tent, and tried to lower him down the mountain. And we got so far when one of the climbers, in fact it was George Bell who was roped to me, slipped. And
George Bell slipped?
Well, George Bell slipped. And I was roped, we were roped in pairs. I was roped to him, and he pulled me off. And very luckily, our rope crossed another rope to a person who was tied to Arthur Gilkey, who we were lowering. And
yeah, continue, please.
That eventually we were held in what is still known as the belay by Peter Schoening, who held 5 of us as we fell on the rope.
I mean, what, he had a very solid belay?
He had a very solid belay. He was a very, very, very technical climber, very good climber. And he had practiced belaying in his own country, throwing a sack of earth off the edge of the mountain and then belaying it. And he had practiced various belay techniques. And so he was an absolute expert. And we were very lucky that it was he who was there. And he held us all. And 5 of us slowly were able to get onto our feet again and move to a camp which we put quite nearby and recover.
What was your feelings then? Were you scared? When you were falling, do you remember anything?
I remember falling and thinking that, bus, this is finished, this is the end. And then suddenly there was a jerk on my rope and I stopped very temporarily and then started sliding again until there was another very heavy jerk and I stopped. And we were slowly able to get into a camp tent to one side. But Arthur Gilkey, who we were lowering, we had to leave him on the slope. And we put 2 ice axes very firmly into the snow above him and anchored him to the ice axes So he was there hanging below the ice axis, and the rest of us went over to make an emergency camp. And after a while, it was Bob Bates, one of the Americans, and I went back to see what we could do about moving Arthur Gilkey. But George Bellham, sorry.
That's fine. Few names can change. Doesn't matter after so many years.
Yeah. And he'd gone. And
Arthur Gilkey had gone.
Had gone.
Well, what had happened?
An avalanche. An avalanche had come down and cleared the whole slope.
But his anchor was not strong enough to take that avalanche.
No, it wasn't. They'd taken the whole thing had gone. It was difficult to see it because I'd lost my glasses and was slightly snowblind, and looking across, it was difficult. But it all looked as though it was broken up, and so I could only assume that it had been an avalanche, and the had gone. And so then the rest of us slowly went down the mountain, and we could see awful traces of where he had fallen, blood on the rocks, and eventually bits of his sleeping bag and so on. And eventually the rest of us got down.
Were you able to locate his body ultimately? No.
No, we tried, and it would have been done into a crevasse. That was a postscript. Many years later, another expedition found Parker. And we knew it was from our expedition because of the colour and so on. And it must have been torn off his body, and he was down the glacier. And this was some 5 miles down the glacier. It was found many years later. So that was K2.
And then how did you all come down? Safely? Were you scared? There was a big commotion?
Slowly, very carefully. Because we were in a bad condition, and obviously because of the accident, we were being very careful.
And how did Houston and Bates and all that took it? Was there any difference of approach between Americans and the British?
Well, I was doing the British, so it was all American, really. It was all American.
Yeah.
It wasn't Anglo-American, it was American with one British liaison.
Okay.
But Charlie Huston had been, he had hit his head, and he was delirious. Still working?
Yeah.
He was delirious. He didn't know what had happened and kept talking nonsense around. And we eventually got him down to base camp and rested, and then eventually he got better and recovered. And then slowly back to Skardu and home, having lost Arthur. When we were up the mountain, and the porters, the coolies and the porters were still in base camp. By the time we got down there, they'd built an enormous cairn, a great pile of rocks, which was a memorial to Arthur Gilkey. And when we got down, we made a plaque and put it on the cairn. And I'm told now that the cairn is festooned with plaques from other people who've been killed in the area, not just on K2, but in the whole of that area of Karakoram. And they put plaques there, memorial plaques, in their memory.
Now, during this expedition, you had no Sherpa, no high altitude support at all.
We had with us 6 people from Hunza. And this was the first time that the people of Hunza had been employed. And we'd heard how tough they were and how healthy they were. And we couldn't bring Sherpas for political reasons. And so we'd used these 6, and they turned out to be very good. And then from then on, they became more and more trained and more expert. Now it's normal in Pakistan. If you go on an expedition, you take Hunza porters with you.
Yeah, I mean, you have to equip them, and then they climb very high.
We equipped them, and they came fairly high. I've forgotten which camp they came to, about camp 3 or 4. Not very high.
They were good in ice and techniques?
No, we taught them. And they were just learning. And so we wouldn't let them climb alone. They only climbed when they were climbing with us, carrying heavy loads. Now, of course, they've become experts. And they're acting as guides, and it's bringing quite a lot of money into their country, acting as porters and guides for other expeditions.
And what sort of food you were carrying during those days? What is the difference from today?
It was American food, and they'd started making these freeze-dry, frozen food that was dried out, and you had to mix a lot of water with it, and then it reconstituted itself. It was some of the early days of how to do rations. It was good. It was good.
And then after K2 you continued, you went to America with them, or?
After K2, I didn't go to America with them then, but I went later because of that. I went lecturing in America. No, it wasn't K2. It was after K2, I went to Kangchenjunga.
Immediately? There was no gap in between?
2 years.
Uh-huh.
K2 was 53, and then 55 was Kangchenjunga.
But aftermath of K2, was there any discussions, talks in London or in USA?
Yes.
How the accident happened, what happened?
Yes, I did a certain amount of lecturing on K2.
But there was no inquiries why this accident happened, or?
Well, if there was, it would be done in America.
But was it done?
I don't know whether there was a formal inquiry. I think there was by the American Alpine Club. And there's an article about it somewhere in the Alpine Journal, or American Alpine Journal. And of course we had to have a certain inquiry in Pakistan to enable them to produce a death certificate. And get someone who had actually died in Pakistan. And we had to prove
Yep. But after, say, returning to civilization, were you all upset? Maybe, say, drinking or discussing Art Gilkey or your hard experiences? Because you had suffered some frostbites also, an injury.
Well, they had all gone to America. I was alone in England, and I had certain discussions there with frostbite.
No, but instead, when you returned at Rawalpindi, or there was nothing?
Oh, Rawalpindi, there was a certain amount of discussion with I've forgotten his name now. There was a British person who was very much involved with climbing. Peter Goodwin?
Peter Goodwin, yes.
Peter Goodwin. And I've forgotten who the Pakistani people were. Anyway, there was inquiries there. And so what's that, K2?
And along, still keeping with K2, did they sort of change your approach to mountains after K2, or this accident, tragedy, were you, say, scared, or say family said, now don't go, your wife said, no more climbing?
I wasn't married then.
Oh.
No, I wasn't married.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a problem. And what happened after Kangchenjunga?
Yeah. So just 1 minute, can we take a little halt?
Yeah.
Change my batteries and everything.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Your life till K2. So now after K2, how did you go for Kangchenjunga? It was almost immediate?
No, K2 was in 1953. Kangchenjunga was in 1955.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky to be invited by Charles Evans, who led the Kangchenjunga expedition, to be a member of the team.
How did you, you knew Charles Evans, or was just out of the blue?
Out of the blue it came from Charles Evans, yes.
Because you had by this time climbed Tirich Mir, you had climbed...
I climbed Tirich Mir and K2. And Charles was a wonderful man, and very, very quiet.
Just 1 minute.
Yeah.
In between, weren't you... people were regretting that you had not gone to Everest?
There was a very short period, because almost at the same time that I was not selected for Everest, I had the invitation from Charlie Houston to go to K2.
No, but after climbing K2, Everest was still going on, 53.
No, we climbed K2...
in 52?
No, 53.
53, all right.
53. And we'd heard... We were quite later, much later than Everest. And we'd heard the climb of Everest when we were climbing K2.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was there any British establishment feeling that you should have been on Everest? Was there a little murmurs about it?
There were certainly murmurs, why wasn't I on the Everest team? Michael Ward in particular, and in his book he writes about it, that I should have been on the Everest team. But
and any comments from establishment,
nothing.
Hunt or RGS committee?
No, not that I know of. No.
I mean, any reprimand that why you were not taken? I mean, any, let's say, questions to John Hunt?
No, I don't think so. No.
And Shipton was also your friend, so Shipton did not, let's say, push for your inclusion initially?
He did, but he did try. But anyway, I didn't go. But I went to K2 instead, which was better.
There was no controversy about it?
No.
Or you gave out a press statement saying something?
I didn't say anything. I kept quiet. No.
But you were feeling inside little hurt?
No, I was quite happy because K2 was much better, much bigger project, more difficult mountain. We didn't have oxygen, so in some ways it was a more successful expedition than the Everest one, and it got some very good publicity, very good press. So I wasn't concerned really.
Okay. So no controversy. As a journalist, I am trying to fish.
No.
Okay, so then Charles Evans asked you for Kangchenjunga.
And then Kangchenjunga, Charles Evans.
And now, just in between here, what was, where was Tillman and Shipton? They were nowhere now in consideration for any higher peaks, or they were not interested?
There was, as you know, there was a certain amount of discussion as to why Shipton didn't lead the Everest expedition.
What was that controversy about? Why he was rejected for the leadership?
It was considered that he would not be sufficient. It was the Swiss had got permission for the following year, and so if the British hadn't climbed it when they did, the Swiss would have been there first. And so it needed a pucker bandobust, proper organisation, really, and Shipton wasn't into that. He would just make a few notes on the back of an envelope and look at the mountain, how lovely it is, and so on. But he wouldn't climb Everest that way.
Now, do you think he would have climbed it if it is his approach?
I doubt it, but it may have done because of the team. It was it depends on what team he had. A very strong team. I don't know. It's not certain by any means. But John Hunt wanted to make certain they did climb it, and
ultimately, if Shipton had climbed it with his approach, don't you think future of mountaineering would have been different? People would be climbing in small teams, alpine style throughout. Because of John Hunt's success, the whole regimentation in mountaineering came.
Not really, only on the very big mountains. We still had people going alpine style and small groups going, but not on Everest. So it didn't really change but it at least meant the British got to the top of Everest and not the Swiss first. Yeah.
So you think the sacrificing of Shipton was a correct decision?
It was if the mountain was to be climbed. It's doubtful, or it's not doubtful, it's questionable as to whether under Shipton's philosophy and leadership they would have got to the top.
And who were the others who dropped out with Shipton? Anybody from the team who said, no, we are not going to go if there is no Shipton?
I don't know. I think there was. I can't remember any particular people. I think they did initially, and then John Hunt was a very forceful character and a very persuasive, and he persuaded them bit by bit to come with him. Initially they all said, no, if Shipton's not going, we're not going. Then slowly they came round to going with John Hunt. Well, you know him, and you know he's a very nice person and very persuasive and so on. And so he persuaded them to come along, and they did.
So, okay, so then you were invited by Charles Evans for Kangchenjunga.
Right.
Okay, so you immediately said yes.
Certainly.
And by that time also you were not married.
Not married.
So no family to...
No family to worry about, no.
Okay.
No.
So then how did it start, Kangchenjunga?
How did it start?
I mean, how the team was selected? Were you involved in any processes?
Yes, we did various... Well, mainly, Charles Evans was determined that it should be a close team, no prima donnas. He was going to be no prima donnas, and that we'd all should get on together. And we met up in Wales in various places several times until the team gelled, so to speak, and it finished up as a very close, very happy team under Charles's very quiet, unassuming leadership. And it was a very successful, very enjoyable expedition.
He was a different leader than Sir John Hunt?
Completely, yes.
But less organized?
I suppose so, organised, but not in the same military way. And we had people, in the team who helped and so on. It was very much a team effort, and Charles was a very fine, unobtrusive leader. And as you know, we got not just the 2 climbers, but 4 climbers to the top. As I said in my lecture, we had problems with the Sikkim government, who believed the gods lived on the summit, and so that we couldn't go. And as you saw in the slides, Charles went down to Gangtok and discussed with the ruler of Sikkim, and it was agreed that we should go, but we wouldn't go to the very top. And we didn't go to the very top. We stopped, it's from here, just sort of the top of the house over there, but not very far, but we weren't on the very summit. And so hence the name of the book, Kangchenjunga, the untrodden peak. But even so, the Sikkimese were quite upset that we got as far as we did, because they thought we wouldn't get anywhere, And as I showed you in the slides, Charles then went down to Gangtok to make peace with the ruler, and it finished up on amicable terms.
No, but you had kept your promise.
We had kept our promise, but they didn't think we would get anywhere near. But we had kept our promise, yes. And as I said when I was talking, the Russians went the next year, and they just went all over it. So,
yes.
Yes,
so now, Kangchenjunga, how was the lower slopes? Were they challenging for climbing? How were you carrying luggage? Many Sherpas with you?
There were 2 sort of bits of Kangchenjunga. Halfway up there was the great shelf, was it called, the great slab of fresh snow, flat snow. You had to climb up onto that, and that was a walk, a long walk along, then climbing again on the final bit up to the col, and then finally up to the summit ridge.
But at the lower, there was not much difficulty.
Well,
do you have fixed ropes, or you were just climbing free?
No, we've had fixed ropes. We put in certain fixed ropes. We tried the first route, and that was too dangerous. So we then came on the left over what we called the hump, and that dropped down, avoiding most of the lower icefall, into a safer basin.
And who was leading all this route opening climb? You were taking turns?
Taking turns, yeah. You're taking turns. Mostly on ropes of 2, and taking it in turns.
So who was your general rope mate? So most of the time with?
I think it was George Bell. I can't really remember. We swapped about. Yeah.
Okay, so then after the lower fixed ropes, you went up and pitching different camps. And you were constantly on the mountain, or you were doing up and down?
No, we were constantly on the mountain. We didn't come off the mountain again. We stayed on the mountain, ferrying stores forward. We didn't come right down to base camp and start again.
So what about acclimatization?
Well, it happened. This was a great advantage of the old expeditions. We walked from Darjeeling to base camp for 2 weeks, up and down, up and down, up and down. And so we acclimatized as we went along. And then on the mountain, carrying stores up and back, we acclimatized as we went along. And this is one of the differences. So many of the modern expeditions fly in or helicopter in to their base camp, go too fast, and you have all the problems of altitude sickness and so on.
Okay, so then the middle part, now, in the Kangchenjunga, as you went up the shelf, how was the next part? Was it very broken?
The next part was more challenging, steeper.
What were the difficulties there?
Well, it was steep ice, very steep ice and deep snow, until we got up onto the col, and from the col we could look across and see Everest, and look back and see all our route down. and then from the col we had the climb up the ridge, where there's mostly snow, quite easy snow climbing, except for the final bit where we had rock, which Joe Brown climbed, remember? And then we went round and found another snow slope going to the top.
How was that final rock climb? Was it very challenging? Worth, Joe Brown exerting?
Yes, it was. He used a sling. He thought it was a proper bit of climbing at last.
Oh.
He hadn't enjoyed the other bits.
No, the other snow bits he
didn't enjoy it at all.
And you were with Joe Brown? Or?
We were four of us, not all together.
You climbed in pairs of two?
No, I was with Norman Hardy.
With Norman Hardy.
Yeah.
George Band and George Brown were together.
Yeah. I was with Norman Hardy.
But climbing at that height, was it very challenging, rock climbing?
Well, the rock climbing must have been, but we didn't do the rock climbing. We went around on ice and snow. But it must have been quite challenging for Joe. But
then after Joe climbed it, what, you had a fixed ropes to go up?
No, we didn't go up that.
Oh, you just changed your route?
We just changed the route very slightly. And we could avoid this difficult bit just up an easy snow slope. We didn't even take our crampons off.
Oh.
And it was very easy to go to the top. So Joe's bit was unnecessary, but he enjoyed it.
Okay, and then you said you stopped, of course, a little bit before the summit. But how was the view?
Fantastic.
It was a clear day, very clear day.
Clear day. And we could look across to Everest, look across north into China, Tibet. But looking south, the vision faded before we got to the horizon. The horizon was so far away that we couldn't see the horizon. The vision just faded out after I don't know how many hundreds of miles. But the view went right down to the Bay of Bengal.
And Tibet, that side, towards north and towards east, how was it? You could see, of course, the Everest.
We could see across to Everest, yes.
And towards north?
North, it was just a flat plateau, disappearing onto the horizon. Yeah.
So it was
quite a view.
Very great, marvelous view.
Fantastic view.
And you took a lot of pictures?
Yes, we did. Yeah. Yeah, we did a lot of pictures.
And were you at all tempted a little to trot to the summit?
No, we weren't at all.
You felt satisfied where
quite satisfied where we were. We could see everything, and the summit, there it was, but we wouldn't have seen much more from up there, and so we stuck to our word. Yeah.
That's good. And then there was a little story that after you came down, there was a big storm which completely destroyed a lot of things in Sikkim as a curse from Kangchenjunga because of your climb. Is it true?
I don't know that story.
Yeah, they say that after you came down there was a heavy rains and big floods, and that was because
I don't know. I hadn't made it on here.
Basically, I think one of you was 6 foot tall, maybe you or George Band, and when they stand up, you were 5 feet below, so your head was 1 foot above their god.
Well, George Band was quite tall, so that's.
So then the descent. Now, how was the descent? I believe you lost one Sherpa. Or did he die, one Sherpa?
We did. The descent was quite straightforward. But when we got down, we had the sad news that one Sherpa died, Pemba Dorji. And I still worry about this because he had come with us when we were going up, as far as, I can't remember which camp, quite a high camp. And he was very tired, but he kept going on and on and on and on, and got to the high camp. And then they went back down again. And we heard almost then that he was ill, and he had died before we got down. And I fear he literally just worked himself to death. And so in some ways we were responsible for letting him work so hard. So it's always worried me that we were responsible for his death.
So what, you could get his body and bury him at base
camp? Yes, we buried him at base camp. There's a place called Pashe's grave.
Who was Pashe? He died earlier?
Sorry?
Pashe was, what, a climber?
Pash. Yes, it's a long story. they had been there in the Great Beast, Alistair Crowley. Do you remember the Alistair Crowley expedition?
Yeah.
Well, he was with Alistair Crowley, the Great Beast, and he had died on that expedition and had been buried near base camp, what was still known as Pasha's Grave, and that's where we buried our Sherpa.
Okay, so then you came down and walked back to Darjeeling.
Came down, walked back to Darjeeling, a different route. We went in along the Singalila Ridge and came back through Sikkim, lower down, stopped at Gangtok and saw the ruler, made our peace for him because he wasn't happy. We didn't go to the top, but even say he wasn't happy that we got as high as we did. And then...
and who received you? Was there a big celebration or people receiving you?
There wasn't a big celebration there, but there was when we got back to Darjeeling. Yeah.
At Darjeeling, I believe Tenzing and Jill Henderson and all, they came to
they came to see us, yeah. Jill Henderson and Tenzing, yeah. And we had big celebrations there.
What were the celebrations? A lot of drinking or something else?
No, it was drinking and eating. Yeah. Dancing, of course.
Dancing with the Sherpas?
Local dancing, yes. Yeah.
You must be a good dancer.
No, it's not. Oh, a bit. Yes, we do this sort of dancing. Yeah, local dancing.
Local dancing. And you like tomba, the Sherpa drink?
Tomba. What, the drink?
Yes.
Oh, we called it something else. Chung.
Chang, yes.
Chung.
Also Chang.
Chung. Yeah.
Yes. So then from there you went off to England with the success of Kangchenjunga.
Then we went back after that back to England. Yeah.
So how was it received in England, your Kangchenjunga?
Oh, it was quite a big celebration. It was a big do at the Alpine Club and Geographical Society. It was well received, but nothing like Everest, of course. We weren't all knighted and given OBEs and CBs and things. It was just quietly.
So you were not knighted?
No.
You received OBE later?
Not then, later. Much later.
But then by this time you would have been a hero. You climbed K2 and Kangchenjunga, number 2 and number 3.
That's it, yes.
And both first ascents.
Yes.
So.
But no, there was just celebrations at the Alpine Club and Geographical Society, but no awards, so to speak.
And by that time, there were more regrets that you were not on Everest?
Yes, there were comments that I should have been on Everest.
And what was your reaction?
I wasn't. I wasn't really worried. I was quite happy with what I had been doing.
No, I mean regrets that, or internally, or saying it out. Oh, I should have been there.
No. In fact, it wasn't made much of it then. It was later on that Mike Ward wrote the book and various people and made comments that I should have been on Everest. But I was on K2, which was much better.
And you are very satisfied with Kangchenjunga also?
Oh, yes. Kangchenjunga was, I think, the classic climb. It was minimum fuss, very close teamwork, everybody happy, lots of climbers to the summit, or to near the summit.
Yes.
Brilliant leadership by Charles Evans. Absolute classic expedition.
And George Bell and others, then there was one more attempt, just with your Ascent, expedition was called off.
Yeah.
There was no chance for other people to even go up.
No.
And how did your family receive? Were you married by now?
No, I wasn't married yet. No, I wasn't married yet.
2 more expeditions were awaiting.
A few more, yeah.
2 more, and then only you would decide to marry.
That's it.
You did not marry while you were doing mountaineering, actually.
Yes, I did. Because I was engaged, and I remember Sue, my late wife, she was a teacher.
Where did you meet her?
At a friend's wedding. She was bridesmaid and I was best man.
Oh.
But she was the teacher at school, and 55, and her headmistress came into into her class where she was teaching, said, "I've just heard on the radio that your boyfriend has climbed Kangchenjunga." And so,
Oh, that's wonderful.
and then I went to lecture in America and earned quite a lot of enough money to buy an diamond engagement ring.
Oh.
And so I telephoned from America and proposed, and that's when we got married and engaged.
So you gave a diamond ring for her.
The diamond
ring called Kangchenjunga. That's very nice. And so
I think my daughter may have been wearing it. I think she's got it on one of her hands.
But was it a diamond ring or she's just
Diamond
wearing it?
Diamond ring.
Golden ring. She's wearing.
I think Sally was wearing golden ones, but I think she was wearing the diamond one too.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We'll check up on that and take
we'll
a
check
picture
up and
of
see.
it.
Yeah.
Yes. So after Kangchenjunga, you settled down to. You are not married yet. You will marry after Everest.
Yeah, I married before Everest.
Before Everest, but after Haramosh.
No, before Haramosh.
Yes.
Before Haramosh.
Before Haramosh. Before Haramosh.
Yeah.
So she must be really stressed.
She was.
After
Yeah.
Haramosh experience.
It was. I shouldn't really have gone on Haramosh because we were married, and we just had a son who was only a few months old, 2 or 3 months old, and so she had a very hard time with me going on Haramosh, leaving her. But
so now, with a little brief halt, we come back to Haramosh, which is going to be a more detailed and full story.
Yeah.
Because that is relatively still unknown except for one book. So
the last Blue Mountain.
Yes. So let's wait and
Yep.
then we carry on. Thank you. To go to Haramosh. Okay. So then, how did you raise funds?
We had a book contract.
With the publisher?
Publishers, yes. I think it was Hodders, Hodder and Starton. We got certain grants from the Everest Foundation and from the university, and we all put in, I think it was £100, which is a lot of money in those days, individual, and that raised the funds. And we were given a lot of stores free, and they came to where I was living in Camberley, and my garage was full of bags of sugar and this, that and the other, which we then broke down into small loads.
Okay, then it was all completely private affair.
Private affair.
Yes.
And we went to
who had heard of Haramosh first time? It was not a known mountain then.
No, it wasn't. And I know we who we consulted, I can't remember, but we were looking for a mountain, as I said, that was easy to get to.
No, but how did you sort of come to know Haramosh?
I don't know.
Okay.
I can't remember how it was that. We knew what we wanted in the way of what sort of mountain, and somebody must have advised us, but I can't remember who it was now. Anyway, that's what we chose. Somebody had seen it from the south side and said it was impossible that side, so we didn't look there, but we looked for various other ridges, south, the northeast ridge and the left ridge, but the north face was quite impossible. And
so
eventually,
now from England, how did you sort of start? By ship? Or
we went.
Rawalpindi?
John Emery went out by ship with the equipment, and the rest of us flew to Rawalpindi, Karachi initially. Yes, to Rawalpindi. And there we were looked after by General Shahid Hamid, who I'd known before, and he and his wife Tara kindly looked after us. And then we flew up to Gilgit, Bristol Freighters, I think. Funny what aeroplanes they had then. And anyway, we managed to arrange that and flew to Skardu.
So that was also a 2-3 day hopping flight from England to Skardu.
Oh, we couldn't fly direct to Skardu. We flew to somewhere, then up. Yes.
2-3 different places.
Yes, yeah. Then to Skardu. In Skardu we listed all our porters and the Hunza porters met us there, and we crossed the river, and then trekked up to the Baltoro Glacier.
How many porters you had to employ? Quite a large number?
We thought it was a large number. I think it was 150 or something.
That's quite a large.
Or maybe not quite as many. But I know that we were amazed when this year had 600 the following year. Much of it was because from Ascoli, the 7 days up the glacier, where there's nowhere to stop, so you have to carry food for the porters, as well as for yourself, and for the porters to come down again. So we had to have quite a lot to start with, then we dropped them off as we went further up the glacier towards base camp.
Okay, so then at base camp you retained 4 porters or
Six,
more?
I think.
6 porters.
6 from Hunza.
Hunza.
And that was the first time that the Hunza porters had been used instead of Sherpas, because we couldn't use Sherpas over there anyhow. And so that's where the Hunza porters made their name as potential altitude climbers.
So now you began on the mountain slowly. How did you go? Who were the climbers? What was the route like?
It was in stages. We had to base camp, and then there was a steep bit up onto the col, and the route there had to be wrecked and so on. And halfway up, we had to put a small camp, but it was so steep we had to cut a ledge in the mountain and make a sort of platform. And then we got up onto the col, where it was easier. We had a large camp there. And then we went round onto the final ridge, until we got up to the ridge where the cardinal's hat, that feature. And when we got there, we wonderful climb, and we got a lovely day, and we got to this ridge, and we could look right along the whole of the top ridge to the final summit of Haramosh. And we realized that there was a long route between the summit we were on and the final summit, that there's no way that we had the time or the resources, the backup, the blunderbuss, to do it, but there certainly would be a possible route there. And that was the route that the Austrians climbed the following year, putting in more camps and so on, because they had a bigger expedition. And having got to that stage, if we had turned round as we should have done and come down, it would have been a very straightforward reconnaissance, successful. We'd found a possible route, but hadn't got time to do it. But from the very ridge where we stopped to look over, to the left there was a little high ridge slope going up, and Bernard Gillett, the ambitious one, who always wanted to be a bit higher, said, let's just go up there and see if we can see anything more. And we said, there's no point in it, because in any way it's a nasty cornice. But he was very determined, and so John Emery, nice chap, but he said, well, if you must go, I'll go with you and we'll rope up. And the two of them went up, keeping back from the cornice. And it wasn't the cornice that broke off, but this other slope avalanched. And they were carried down into this snow basin, must have been 300 feet. And we thought, because we heard the avalanche, then it stopped for a bit, and we knew what was happening. It was in this basin, then it went over the north face, and after a long delay there was the roar of it going over the north face, right down onto the Marnik Glacier. And we assumed they'd been swept right down back onto the
Bernard Gillett, and who was with him? There were 2 persons who were swept down. Bernard Gillett.
Bernard Gillett and John Emery.
John Emery.
Yeah. In the event, when the snow from the avalanche, the wind and snow and everything, when that all settled down, we could look down into the basin, and we first of all saw one speck movement coming up out of the snow, and then another beside them. And we realized that the two of them had survived, and they were managing to climb out of the avalanche debris. And so we had the situation now with
How many feet they had fallen in the avalanche?
300.
300 feet.
300
Very lucky escape.
with yeah,
Okay.
300.
Mm-hmm.
And so we tried to shout to them, couldn't make ourselves heard. We had with us one of our rucksacks we took off and put in extra jerseys, some food that we had with us, water bottles, and we went and put it down the route where they had fallen. But sadly, it veered off to the right, and instead of going down to them, it disappeared into a crevasse to the right. So we had lost. So there was no option now but to go back to camp, the top camp for Ray and I, get more food, more rope, have plenty of food ourselves, and then come back to try and see if we could help them. And we got back to the top. And then
you told them that you were going back?
We shouted, and you couldn't hear. We got back and then started cutting steps along the traverse to where we could see them, because they kept signaling to us, and we didn't know why. It was because there was this great cliff, and they were trying to get us to where the Bergschrund would be crossable. And so slowly cutting steps, all through the night, in fact, we went on, and then next morning we were just above them and got down to them. Bernard Gillett was delirious. He'd banged his head. John was all right, but he'd lost his gloves, and he'd pulled his jersey down as best he could to save his fingers. And they had both lost their ice axes, so they hadn't been able to start coming up. Anyway, so straight away there was no point in staying down there, so we started climbing up, and we got so far up, and I turned round and looked, and Bernard Gillett had slipped off again. Anyway, we started climbing it again, and then slowly we cut across the traverse where Ray and I had purposely made quite big steps. And we got to the end of the traverse, and there was a steep bit going up, and John Emery led, and he and Bernard got to the top, leaving just Ray Calvert to come. And Ray Calvert had lost a crampon on the way down on one of his feet, and he was having difficulty climbing. And as he came in for the final bit, he was roped to me, and I said, "Be careful round there." Anyway, he slipped and pulled me off, and so the two of us were back in the basin. So the two people we were rescuing were rescued, and the two people who were trying to rescue were now back down the bottom. So it was now I think night, because we weren't very conscious. Anyway, next I regained consciousness and started over and started climbing up with Ray behind me. But he kept falling off without his crampon. And so eventually I thought the others must be coming to help us, and we would then go back and be able to help him. But as it was, I climbed all through that day, and then eventually up the final bit, where I had to use my elbows because my hands were all frozen. I got to the top, where there was we had left rucksacks before, and I got some glucose that I managed to eat, glucose tablets. And there was a water bottle, so I thought I'd have a drink, but of course it was frozen solid. I didn't. And then on down, and I saw the tracks, and I went slowly down the tracks back to the top camp. And quite near the camp, I noticed that the tracks divided.
But you had pulled up the others too also by now?
No.
They are still down?
Still down. And we're going back to get help.
Yes, and you saw two set of tracks going.
And one lot went straight over the edge, and that was Bernard Gillett. And then in the tent, sticking out of the feet, one of the tent with these 2 feet which was John Emery, had his crampons on still, and he was obviously in a very bad state. And I said to John, "Where's Bernard?" He said, "Oh, he's gone." I said, "Gone where?" He said, "Oh, he's dead. He's gone over the edge." And John Emery was in a very bad state, completely exhausted and frostbitten. And I eventually heard from him that he had fallen. Bernard had gone off the edge, and on his way back to camp he had fallen into a crevasse and spent most of the night there, and managed to get out, and had only arrived in the camp where he was just a few hours before me. So I then I got food going, melted water, and got him drinks and so on, and so we must rest and get strength back to go back and help Ray Calvert, who's still in the basin. Next morning, I got out of the tent and I couldn't stand up. I was too exhausted and frostbitten and so on. But there was some ski sticks, and that's enabled me to balance. John Emery crawled out of the tent and he couldn't move, couldn't walk. And so there was no possible way that we could go back and help Ray.
Look for Bernard. Yeah.
Help Ray.
Go and look for Bernard Gillett.
No, Bernard Benu was dead.
Oh.
No, help Ray Calvert, who was still in the basin.
Ray Calvert was on it.
We said that we'd go back and help him. But of course,
Bernard, you knew he's dead. He's
Yeah.
fallen off the cliff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Help Ray. But in fact, we couldn't get back anyhow. But slowly we realised that in no way would he possibly still be alive, because he wouldn't have survived the night alone down in the crevasse, when John and I had only just survived in a tent with food and so on. And that although he found it hard to accept it, Ray Calvert must be dead. And so there was Bernard definitely dead, and Ray Calvert certainly dead. And so it became the business of trying to get John down the mountain, save John. And I'd lower him down a bit, and then he'd stop, and I'd come down to him, and then we'd lower him. And slowly we got on down, and eventually to the top camp where the American Bernard Gillett, Scott Hamilton,
yes,
was. And we thought once we get there, he will help us. We got there, and he was completely useless. He was a combination of shock, and at some stage he had lit a primus stove and knocked over some hot water onto his hand, and slightly burnt his hand with hot water. And he was more concerned about this than anything else. Anyway, sadly now, down we go. And instead of Scott helping us, John and I had to tell him what to do. And
you are perfect, all right. You have no injuries.
Frostbite, hands and fingers, yeah. And a breaking a bone in the hand. I didn't know it then, but I had. This hand wouldn't work. Eventually we got down to a high camp, big camp, to find that the tent had been put up, there were sleeping bags in there and food, all organised, and we realised that the Hunza porters must have come up, although they weren't equipped to do it and hadn't got the skill, but they'd come as high as they could and then got the tent ready. And so we were able to have a comfortable night in that tent, with plenty of food and drink. And the next morning, no ice axes, but we had a stake that we'd use for keeping the tents up. John and I started on down very slowly, and eventually we saw these little figures coming up the icefall, and it was the porters who had come up to meet us. And then if you remember the slides, we eventually get back down. And then back to Rawalpindi, where dear Tahira Tara Shahid Hamid and the Shahid Hamid family looked after us.
But how did you feel living up to Amber alive on the mountain? Was it a very trauma? A very hard decision? Rick was on the mountain and you were not sure whether he's alive or dead.
Oh, we knew he was dead.
How?
Because it was we'd only just lived the night in a tent with food and heat. He was out in the open in a crevasse with nothing. And when last seen, he was almost dead, so he must almost certainly have died that night. So there was no question of...
I mean, there was nothing on your consciousness that you left somebody alive? No.
No, but on the other hand, there was our consciousness that, we'd left him at all, and we couldn't done more for him. No, we didn't think we'd left him alive, sadly. No, this is one of the things that comes out in the book. Was it a quandary? What did I do? Try and save John, knowing it would Bernard, knowing that Ray would die. Was it a question of a choice? But it wasn't a choice. It was inevitable. Ray would have died, and John would have. We all would if we hadn't come down. So it wasn't a question of leaving someone alive.
You are not, let's say, in a consciously kind of in a double mind or feeling guilty. No.
Always, yes. One always will feel guilty about it. Not that particular thing, but whether one should have said, when Bernard wanted to go a bit higher, if one had said don't, it would never have happened. The whole thing would never have happened. But he was very determined, and whether one would have stopped him, other than by physically stopping him, I'm not sure. But that's the worry, really. That, last Blue Mountain.
Yes. And that book was, you sort of talked to James Ramsey Ullman. You gave him all the details and ideas.
Sorry?
For the book, did you give the ideas to the author?
The book, Ralph Barker, who wrote it, who were the publishers? Cassels? No, Chatto and Winters, I can't remember. But there was going to be one person who was going to write it who knew a bit about climbing, and he wasn't available. And so they produced Ralph Barker, who specialized in telling stories for other people. He had written several books, Down in the Drink, about people who rescued pilots who were shot and so on. And he specialized in telling stories for other people, not ghostwriting, but finding the story and then telling it. And John Emery was badly frostbitten. He was in hospital, in St Mary's Hospital, and I was in bed at home, and he spent hours with us with a tape recorder, talking and getting questions. And he obviously had a very acute mind, because I've forgotten what particular detail it was. And I was saying that, with this, he said, "Oh, but you said that was Tuesday, now you're saying it's Monday," or whatever, that sort of, he had this sharper mind. And he then produced that book. And at the time, people were saying, "Oh, how can someone who's not a mountaineer write about mountains?" But when he had done it, became the classic of not just technical climbing. We went from A to B and up to canvassing, but a full story of the whole ethos of the thing.
Yeah. And what was the reaction back in England? People were horrified, shocked. Were there inquiries? You had to give lectures on this? Explain to anybody?
No, we did lectures later on, but there was no inquiries. There was no question. The facts were there, and they were accepted as facts. There wasn't a question.
And how did families of the deceased took it? You go and met their wives or parents?
One of them, Bernard Gillett's family, and I think, as I said, he was a working class, but they couldn't cope, they couldn't understand it. They just didn't, think how their boy who was such a good climber. And Ray Calvert, the New Zealander, his brother was in London, and his family, mother called herself George. She came out, they were wonderful. A very great family, and they realized that he had died doing what he wanted to do. And I'm still in touch with them, and they're a great family. Bill Calvert, Ray's brother, quite completely different character, got a scholarship to the Royal College of Art in London, and he's an artist.
Oh.
Quite successful.
And what about reaction of your family? Your wife, was she perturbed, disturbed? If she was shocked, angry?
She was very relieved.
Oh.
Very relieved. And it was very naughty of me to go, really, because she hadn't been married very long and the baby was quite young. But she was very good. And then years later, when I was asked to lead the Everest, was it? Anyway, she gave her, yet again, very tolerant. And
but after this Haramosh thing, she was not very much, let's say, shocked or trying to stop you for going further climbing.
I didn't. No, she wasn't. No, she was very good.
Okay, so then how did Everest come about? That was a straightforward, I think.
Everest was
not going up.
Army Everest,
Oh.
and I was by then I was chairman, president of the Army Mountaineering Association, and the Army had done some successful climbs in the Alps and the Himalayas and so on. And so they thought they would make an attempt on Everest. But before that, as a selection and training thing, they climbed Nuptse, which you know. And that went well, but and at the last minute there was an avalanche, and 4 of the best Army climbers were lost. And it looked as though the whole thing, the Everest, would. And so I was summoned by the planning committee and asked what I thought we should do. And said, well, there are plenty of young climbers, because sad, tragic, there's been an accident, but the Army doesn't just give up. They should persevere, and the expedition should go ahead. And this was quite a high-powered party of generals and things. And they said, well, thank you for your advice. We'll go outside. And I was called back. And they said, yes, we think it should go ahead, but only if you will lead it. And I said, well, hang on, I'll be 50 by then, and I haven't been to the Himalayas for 16 years or whatever it was. Anyway, my long-suffering wife yet again gave support, and so I went as leader, with no intention whatever of going to the summit, but of coordinating and having the experience of altitude and all this sort of thing. And sadly, very early on, we had a fatality. We were just got above the icefall, in a camp up on the top there, and one of the climbers, my names are going now. Anyway, in the night he got out of his tent to have a pee, wasn't looking where he was going, went straight down a crevasse, and was killed. So that put a damper on the thing hardly before we'd started. Anyway, we persevered, and eventually the 2 young soldiers got to the summit, Bronco Lane and Robin Stokes. And so, that was considered to be a great success. And that's when they gave me my OBE.
And how many people reached the summit?
Then 2.
2. Okay. And
We
you
had
also climbed till Western Combe?
I went to Western Combe, yes.
Not to South Col?
No, Western Combe. But we had a lot of climbers on the South Col. We were going to try and get 12 people to the top. And I think there were about 20 on the South Col, a big group. We built up a big group. And then the summit pair went off, and we were going to put those people through the summit. And the summit pair that got to the top got stuck on the way down. The snow conditions were bad, and they didn't get back to camp. And so they spent the night out. They made a snow hole and spent the night there. And the next two who were due to go up, and this was great credit to them, Pat Gunson and John, Big John, went up and found them and said, "Come on, down we go." They said, "Well, you two go up first, you know. It's only another, whatever it was, 2 hours climb or something." And they said, "We're not going anywhere. If we don't get you down now, you will." So it was very brave. They gave up their chance. Brought them back to the South Col, where we had this very big group, and they carried them down. One had to be carried all the way, and eventually we got them home. And so that was that.
Yes. So you have great experience, all the three highest
peaks
in the world.
All the world.
And
Yeah.
by this time you are all set for your later part of your life, which
That's
we
it.
will continue in
Yeah.
the next cassette.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
Okay. Well, after Everest, I didn't think I'd be interested in climbing any high peaks anymore, but I got involved. Lord Hunt, John Hunt, as he was then, Sir John, kindly invited me to join an expedition he was leading for young people to Greenland. And this was to do with the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, which he had set up for Prince Philip. And lads and girls who had achieved their gold award were then given an opportunity to go on what one might call a proper expedition. And so the first one was Greenland. And we had a great trip. John Hunt leading. Ian McNaught Davis came, who you know. John Jackson came. John Disley, the runner, cross-country runner. And we went to the Stirning Alps. And groups climbed various peaks there and trekked through the parts of Greenland, visiting Eskimos and so on. And it was a very rewarding expedition. And this was part of the John Hunt Exploration Group, as it was called, of Endeavour Training, which was a youth organisation of which I later became vice president. And within that we had, as I said, the John Hunt Exploration Group, which did these expeditions. We did that one with John, and then another one to Ethiopia. Now John didn't come this time, but Sue came and George Lowe, and we went to the Simien Mountains in Ethiopia. And had a great trip, very interesting trip. And I knew the British Defence Attaché at the time in Addis Ababa, and he kindly arranged at the end of the expedition for the youngsters to have an audience with Haile Selassie, the Emperor. And it was very interesting to meet him. He's minute, he's very small, but he has an enormous presence.
Oh, that's very nice.
And I remember we were taken, it was the time when he was, his life was in danger. And so we were told to go to a certain point, not to a certain palace, but to meet at a certain point in the bus. Then they would decide which palace he was going to be in at that time, and we would go there. And I remember this very well. He was standing beside a table with a lovely bowl full of roses on it, and I was taken up and presented to him. Most impressive personality. And he said to me, "What would you like me to speak to the youngsters in, French or English?" And so he was, obviously, and I said, "No, English, well." And he was extremely good with the youngsters and talked to them and so on. And that was the Ethiopian expedition. what happened next? We've been to Greenland with the Greenland expedition. Greece. Have we been to Greece yet? No.
Mm-hmm. No, not really.
Not Greece. Well, the next expedition was Greece. And we, again, with the youngsters from the Duke of Edward's Award Scheme, we flew to Delphi in the south.
Yes.
And then walked all the way up through the mountains, stopping every now and again with supplies coming. A road. We went through the mountains, and the road party went up the road, and every few days they would come and resupply us, and we'd walked right up to the Albanian border.
Yeah.
And that was again John Hunt Exploration Group, and that was the last trip we did with him. I think I did. It was to Greece. We've been to Ethiopia. We've been to Greece. And now we're getting ready to retire.
So now, before you retired, what was your experience with different people whom you all met? So all these people you met, whom do you think, I mean, as you said, somebody is smaller but large presence. So like this, how was John Hunt?
Oh, well, John Hunt's an outstanding personality, you know. He was.
You enjoyed with him, or still anything because of you not selected for Everest, holding you back?
That didn't worry me. That wasn't relevant. We became very close friends, so I became friends with the family. Joy, his wife, and Susan, who married George. One of my sons was page to their wedding, and we stayed in very close touch with the family.
How was his personality? Highly organized? Was he highly organized?
Oh, John?
Stiff
absolutely.
or very friendly?
Very friendly, but very organized. He wasn't stiff at all. He was very relaxed. He was a very good person, very good at getting on with everybody, whoever they might be. Yeah.
And among the other mountaineers, how was George Band? Remained always your good companion?
George is highly organized.
Yes.
And George does tend to have one priority, and that's George Band. But he's very good and very organised, and Susan, his wife too.
She's also a lovely person.
Like they're both, both great.
And among the old stuff, then you remained friendly with Eric Shipton till his end of his days?
Well, I didn't really know Eric very well, but I mean, I knew of him, and I knew his childhood girlfriend who lives near my village nearby. And so I stayed in touch. And he was, as I said, cremated, and his ashes are on the lake near where I live now.
And Tillman?
Tillman Davis, was it somebody Davis, was his cousin who lives in North Wales. It's some time since I saw her, but I did went up to see them. They live quite near to where John Jackson used to live.
Yes.
And I went up to see her, and there in the hall was a bicycle that he cycled across Africa. The bicycle's there in the hall.
And what about John Jackson? Because I knew him quite well. So
Jacko's an old friend, yes.
How was he, and what was his personality like?
Jacko took life very seriously. He was quite serious. Eileen, his wife, we know very well. And we met many times at reunions. And the last reunion we had in North Wales, the Pennygrade Hotel, for Everest and Kangchenjunga, we combined the two when there were few left for Everest and for Kangchenjunga. We used to have separate reunions. But after the last few years we had them jointly. And John Jackson came to the last one looking very, very ill.
Yes.
And he just lasted long enough for the reunion and died about 10 days later. And Eileen I keep in touch with Eileen.
Yes. Who are the other old Longstaff? Did you know ever, Dr. Longstaff?
He proposed me for the Alpine Club.
Oh.
But I didn't know him, but I mean he was a very, very famous character.
Yes.
Dr. Longstaff and Tobin. who
Yes, it was the
edited the journal before you.
Yes,
Yeah.
the editor also.
They kindly put me up for the Alpine Club.
Mm-hmm. How was he? As a nature, did you sort of meet
Tobin?
him? Tobin? You're more friends with him, or not so much?
I knew him, but I wasn't close. He was much older than me, of course.
Mm.
Much older, but he was a person that one respected. He was a nice person. And he had a daughter who used to look after him, also his wife, as I remember.
Now, how did it come around for you to be president of the Alpine Club? Which years you were there? And was it coming kind of by normal routine, or
Can't remember.
somebody suddenly proposed you?
No, we all had to be proposed and seconded.
Mm.
And I can't remember how it came about. Who? I think George Mann, possibly.
Mm.
Proposed and seconded, and then an unanimous decision by the committee and so on. And I can't even remember when it was now. What years was I president? You probably know better than I do.
You were in 80s.
Yeah,
long time
80s,
back.
yeah.
Before the younger set took over.
I was involved with George Band and I. We found the new premises. We moved the Alpine Club from South Audley
You were
Street.
involved in that?
Yeah, because South Audley Street was the what do you call it, lease was coming to an end.
Yes.
But who was it? Anthony Rawlinson. It was somebody who was a very clever estate agent.
Mm.
And he said, while we've still got, I don't know how many years to run on the lease of the Alpine Club, it is very valuable.
Mm.
And if we sell it, cash on it now, because we only had, it was leasehold, so we'd eventually lost it, we can get a large capital sum, then we can buy freehold. And so that we did. And we wanted to go somewhere. South Audley Street was very expensive, Mayfair and so on. But Old Street, the area where we've gone, was developing, the city was developing. Prince Charles had just bought a property there for his, I've forgotten one of his projects. And so in an area which at the time was fairly ordinary, Bamuli run down, we bought the present property, which has been extremely successful. We at one stage we let out one, as you know, one floor to bring in income. We've got the library there as well, and it's been very successful. And George Band and I did that.
So it was during your presidency that the shift took place.
Yes.
And what other activities you did which you are proud of with Alpine Club? You had your usual reunions, dinners and everything.
We have our reunion dinners.
Major thing you did?
I don't know. One of the reunion dinners, I got Arne Ness to come over as guest of honour. Arne Ness, Norwegian.
Yes.
He came over as the guest of honour and spoke. Otherwise, the main thing for the Alpine Club was changing the whole. I don't even remember South Audley Street.
Yes.
And those leather chairs at the side.
Yes.
And old men would sit there, sort of half asleep during lectures, sort of grunting and Well, we wanted to change the whole attitude and get the young involved and make it a much more vibrant. And this is what we've done in the new premises.
Yeah.
It's much more vibrant. People like the younger people getting involved. And new members, because people weren't joining. They weren't joining because it was an old fuddy-duddy, thing. But now there was a thing called the Alpine Climbing Group.
Yes.
That was really because the young didn't want to join the Alpine Club because it was too. And so now the Alpine.
Lack of climbing.
That's it. But now the Alpine Climbing Group's finished. It's been absorbed into the new club, and the whole place is much more vibrant with and younger.
All right. So after you, who took over the Alpine Club presidency? You have any idea?
From me, was it Steve Venables? Could have been.
No, Venables is just now recent. I think it must be Bonington.
Oh, Bonington. Yes, Chris Bonington.
Chris Bonington. Yes.
Yeah.
So then you finished your presidency, and what were you doing later on? or now happily retired, you've done your duties to the community, everything?
Happily retired down to Wiltshire. My wife wasn't very well,
Yes.
so I didn't like leaving her.
Ah.
And so we,
The wife was not very well
No.
for many years.
quite a few years, not very strong. And so we had quite a large house in our village, on the edge of our village, but a very nice cottage, old cottage, 17 something, came available in the centre of the village, and we moved there some years ago when Sue could still walk.
She had arthritis.
Yes, temporary arthritis and legs, all sorts of problems, broken hips. And where the new house was near the village shop, near the church,
Yes.
near the two pubs, literally within 100 yards of all
very
those.
important for that. And so then what your activities were? You were happily relaxed, pub, back into your...
Into the village, quite
Yes,
village
yes.
life,
Yes.
church warden,
Yeah.
chairman of British Legion, and quietly village life.
Yes. And so aging gracefully and happily.
That's it.
Yes.
And not going to London unless I really have to. Avoiding going to London.
Yes. So now, what are your, let's say, thoughts for the future? I mean, even still, at 82, you have future.
Yeah.
Would you like to do something? Is there any wishes that
No.
you fulfill, you would like to do, or you are very happily go into the sunset of life?
Very happy. Anything I would do now would be an anticlimax. Because I've done all the things I want to do. Going back, for instance, to Kathmandu, the 50th anniversary of Kangchenjunga, the Nepalese government kindly laid on a big tamasha, and we went out to that, and we drove through the streets of Kathmandu in open carriages with flags out and all waving and this, that and the other. Received by the Crown Prince, a big dinner at the Yak and Yeti and all that. And so I've no desire to go back to Kathmandu because it would be an anticlimax.
Yes.
And many things now. I don't go to the Alpine Club much in London because, again, the last few lectures, I did go up there the other day. Somebody was going to lecture, Doug Scott. He was ill or something. Anyway, I was asked to go and talk about Kangchenjunga, which I did. That's the last time I think I go up to the Alpine Club. So retiring gracefully in a nice Wiltshire village.
Oh, wonderful. So, and now any little bit philosophical thoughts on, say, what mountains have given you, or how come you are so lucky to enjoy mountains so much? Was it religion, God's grace, or just...
I don't know. I think it was probably, much of it was accident. By being, as I was in the Indian Army, finishing up in Chitral with that lovely mountain, Tirich Mir, and it developed from there.
No, but as we Indians...
The mountains came to me rather than me having to go to the mountains.
That's, we call destiny, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So you were all the time chosen one.
Yeah, could be.
So now your children have grown up, you have grandchildren, and you are fully content.
That's it, yeah. 7 grandchildren, 4 children, 1 here, looking after me. So you can't go by yourself, you're much too old, she said.
Yeah, but it's very nice. We have
Yes, it's very nice to have her, yeah.
And I'm sure she has made you more comfortable.
Yeah, she has.
So the Himalayan Club is also very proud to have you as honorary member, and we are very happy that you could come.
Well, it's very kind of you to ask me.
So this is the recording for future. We'll keep it for lifelong, what we call oral histories.
Oh, yes.
And we had the best of history from you.
Yeah.
So any final word to say goodbye?
No, to say goodbye, just how wonderful it is to be here, and how grateful I am really to the Himalayan Club for getting me involved so much in the mountains and continuing to keep the interest going.
Yes. Thank you very much.